the next one I picked up was another one that I think I just picked up at the right time, and that is these Faceless Saints, and this, sorry, that's not even close to the right name. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my April wrap-up. So, in April, I read so many things, but there's kind of a little, like, caveat asterisk to it. So according to my stats, I read 24 things in the month of April. As you guys know, I participated in the Magical Readathon, which I did read quite a few. Actually, almost everything in this wrap-up, except for, like, one thing, is for the Magical Readathon. I had an amazing time with the Magical Readathon. I'll leave my links or the vlogs down below if you'd like to check them out if you haven't already. But, like, I go into much greater detail, I think, in those. So we'll just know that those are there. But also, like, I have been really good about making sure that I have been keeping track of all of my reviews on Goodreads. So if you're ever curious, this also goes forward of, like, when I disappear in the summer, but, like, if you're ever curious about what I'm reading, I keep pretty up to date there. So check that out if you want to know, like, concise thoughts. But the reason there are so many books on this list is because, while yes, I read a good amount of stuff for the Magical Readathon, in the background of the Magical Readathon, I was reading a majority of the Lumberjanes series, which is one that I had the third one on my TBR for the Magical Readathon. And then throughout the month, I, like, read not the entire series, but, like, up to, like, close to the end. So we'll do all of those in one big lump wrap when I get to them. But that's why there's so many, because that kind of skewed my stats a little bit, because I was just, like, reading them before bed, or I was just, like, in the mood for one of them for some reason. So they were read in the background, and I really enjoyed that. So that might come back in a few months, but that's why these stats are so ridiculous. But anyway, let's actually dive into the stats, and then you'll know what I'm talking about. So like I said, I read 24 books. A lot of those were the Lumberjane series. I read over 6,310 pages and 128.5-ish hours listened on audio. And that was over 4 audiobooks, 2 physical books, 10 ebooks, and 8 mixed. Age categories, I actually hit most of everything. Not everything, but I had 11 middle grade. Those are those Lumberjanes. 6 YA, 1 new adult, and 6 adult books. Genres, normal-ish for me, but we had 17 fantasy books. Whoa. 5 fantasy and 2 mystery. And of those, the ratings were normal-ish for me. We had 2 5-star, 14 4-star, and 8 3-stars. So I'm not going to mention what all of these were for, but if it's not Lumberjanes, assume it was for the Magical Readathon. So like I said, if you want to know all of my, like, what everything fit for, look at the vlogs. But I started off the month rolling over a couple of things. The first one was the second volume of Cutie and the Beast, which is a manga that I actually found online. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. But now I don't know where to get 3 and 4, so that's the problem. Anyway, I had to give this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. I think I gave the first one 5 stars, so I think I probably enjoyed the first one just the tiniest bit more, but it was so much fun to dive back into these characters. This is a manga that basically follows our 2 main characters. One of them is a girl in high school, and one of them is a professional wrestler. So he basically has this persona of being, like, the big bad, like, beast kind of guy. And so because of that, he doesn't have a whole lot of fans. So one day, this girl is obsessed with him. And so she reaches out to him on a social media platform. I interpret it as, like, this world's version of Twitter, or I guess X now. And so they kind of, like, talk a little bit, and she goes to one of his matches, and they eventually do meet, and he realizes that she is quite young, but it's like a kind of like a romance between the 2 of them. There's only 4 volumes that I am aware of right now, and this one, what I liked about this one is that we got to see our characters again. We got to see a lot of the people that I loved from the first one. We got some really good backstory, especially on our main guy as well as the dad of our main girl. But when you say something like age gap, it does get a little iffy. And I've seen it done in the past where it is absolutely terrible. But in this book, it's actually done okay because the parents are very aware of what's going on, and they even try to stop them from like actually having a romance, but they are aware of like the friendship between them. So they kind of like, her parents specifically, they kind of like have the dad and this guy start to become a little bit closer, kind of start to understand each other a little bit. And while the dad's like, I don't approve of this relationship, I will let you guys still hang out. So it's very like, yes, they still are kind of dating, but it's, everyone knows about it and everyone is very aware, and they're not just like skirting over the fact that there's an age gap between them. They're like actually talking about it, because not only is this age gap like a pretty big one, it's also very illegal. So just be wary of that when you, if you were interested in this one. But I think it's really, really cute. It does have a very fast moving romance plot, like they both fall really, really quickly, but that's pretty normal. I believe this one is this is a shoujo manga, which is a manga made for teen or tween girls. Mangas that fall within that category usually have a romance that is very, very quick. Well, mangas in general just have a romance that like is very, very quick. So it may throw some people off if you don't know that going in, but obviously I knew where we were getting into. So like that didn't startle me. Plus the romance was really fast in the first one as well. So this one just kind of continues on with that pace. And I loved it. It was 4 stars. It was a good time. It wasn't like the most amazing thing I've ever read, but I really enjoyed the series and I can't wait to continue. I'm glad there's only 4 because I would hate to like dedicate a lot of time to something that I may, I don't know, like I still have very iffy feelings about because of the age gap that I keep mentioning. But either way, I liked it. I read it. It was great. Got 4 stars. Also, pretty sure this was on my list of books to read by the end of the year. So I'm really trying to like go through that list. The next one is another one that I rolled over from the month previously, and that is Foxglove by Adeline Grace, which is the second book in the Belladonna series. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I loved this book. This one starts off like directly after the events of the first book. This series basically follows our main character Signa, who has been around death her whole life. Like literally all of her guardians seem to be dying, and her parents died when she was really, really young, so she's been kind of like passed from guardian to guardian. And in the first book she gets finally placed with her cousin, who has just lost his wife and his kids. But Signa has the ability, like because I think she's been around death so much, she has like this connection with like the actual like death embodiment, like the guy who embodies death, and so he's always around her, and because of that she has the ability to see spirits and ghosts. So she ends up seeing the ghost of the dead wife, and the wife is like, I was for sure poisoned, and the same thing I think is happening to my daughter, please figure it out. And so the first book is like a murder mystery where they're trying to solve that. It has a very nice, clean ending, and then the epilogue starts off and we meet some new characters, and it's another murder mystery and this book for a different thing. I loved it. It did take me a little bit of a while to get into it. I think it took me about 100 pages or so. This book is, at least my copy is about 450 pages, so that's not too much in the grand scheme of things. I think I read the first one in the fall, so it had been like a good 6 months or so. I remembered a lot, but some of the side characters' names I got confused in my head, so I couldn't figure out who was who at first, and then I remembered. Once we got into the story, I kind of figured out what was going on. So it does kind of took me a little bit of time to get back into it, so I would definitely suggest, if you can, to read them back to back. And there's a third one coming out later this year, I think in September, so maybe wait until that one comes out and then you can read all 3, just because she's really good, especially in this series. I haven't read anything else by this author, but in this series she's really good at having like a good clean ending and then adding like one last thing of like, and here you go, surprise, have fun. That's really what happened in the first book. The second book I think had a pretty decent ending, where there is a little bit of a cliffhanger, but it's not as dramatic and drastic as the first one, but there's still a cliffhanger. I'm so curious what the third one's going to be about, because like I feel like one arc ended in this one and another one is beginning, so I'm so curious what the third one's about. If you love a good gothic murder mystery story where there's also fantastical elements, because Signa does have some fantastical like abilities, and so she's kind of learning about them in the first one and she kind of expands her knowledge in this one. And if you like some of the elements, I know I've said this before, but if you like some of the elements in the later 2 books in the Kingdom of the Wicked series, especially when it comes to our main character's plot, there are some similarities in this book. I will say no more, but if you like that vibe, I think you'll like this. But this is just a really good gothic kind of story, and I loved it, and I can't wait to read the third one. I loved all of murder and mystery elements. I will say trigger warnings in this one for miscarriage. It's on the page and talked about a lot, especially near the end of this book. So just be aware of that if that is a trigger for you, because they do not shy away from that conversation. But I liked this book a lot. I'm so glad I read it. It was so fun. I just love these characters so much, and like all the twistiness of it. And the cool thing about this book is, while the first book is entirely in Signa's point of view, this one switches back and forth between her and her cousin. So you get some more perspective in this, and then you can kind of see like things her cousin knows and things that Signa knows, and they're not like communicating sometimes. And so I'm like, you as a reader are like, I know things, just talk. Anyway, it was great. I loved it. Okay. This is where I'm going to talk about Lumberjanes. I read the third one for the Magical Readathon, and then one of the other ones I think worked for Magical Readathon later on as well, but I can't remember which one it is. I'm trying to remember how far I got into it. Volumes 3 through 11. So I'm just going to talk about them in like general states, but some of these books got 3.5 stars, and some of them got 4. I am very interested to see where it goes. It's not like the best series of all time, so if you are like on the edge and the idea of reading a like 20-something graphic novel series is not for you, that's okay. You can skip it. You're probably not going to miss a whole lot, but it is a really cool story about a group of 5 girls at this camp, and it's supposed to be like an adventure outdoorsy kind of camp, but all these fantastical things keep happening to them, and they keep getting in the weirdest situations. And so some of these books are very slice of life, in the sense of like they have an adventure and it is contained to that volume only. And then sometimes you do have some books that there was an arc in the first 2 books and that comes back a few times, or there's some new things that are discovered, or there's a character introduced and then you don't see them for a few volumes and then they come back. So it's really a hodgepodge of stuff. I will say also, one thing that threw me off is that the artist changes throughout this series. So it's not the same person. The first 2 volumes, and then I think the third volume might be the same. Maybe not, but like after a while, like it changes. And not only does it change once, it changes a few times. So they've got like 2 or 3 people that are like in rotation, and they do a bunch of them. The coherence when it comes to the art is a little all over the place, but the characters stay pretty true to themselves, and I do like the representation. We have a lot of really good conversations. There's a lot of queer characters in this book, or in this series. You have a lot of conversation with like home life, because some people are really close with their family and some are not. And so you just have a lot of those conversations. It is middle grade, which I think is very evident in some of the messaging that the authors and the illustrators are trying to get across, because like these are really good conversations to have, but they kind of hammer home on some things instead of being like if this was an adult graphic novel series, we would be able to pick up these themes on our own and go, that's cute, that's the conversation they're having. Whereas in this book, they are very like, here's the conversation we're having, for younger readers. It's cute. I like it. I'm definitely going to continue. There's still, like I said, I think quite a handful more. My library has at least up until 18, and I think there's 20 or 22. There's somewhere in there. So I don't know what I'm going to do when we get to the end of the series. But like at this point, I'm now invested in these girls and these characters, and I want to know what happens, because like there is some overarching plot things with time that they're figuring out. It's very much like mentioned once every like few volumes or so, and then you have a volume that is specifically dedicated to that like theme and that conversation. So it's interesting, and that's keeping me going. But like it's not the most amazing thing I've ever read, but at this point I'm invested, and it's just a fun like quick little thing that I could read before going to bed. The next book is a very interesting experience. I feel like I'm going to say that a lot, based on the books that I read this month, but it was Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, which I don't know what happened to my copy. I said I was going to unhaul it once I had done my wrap up, but I guess I unhauled it early because I cannot find it anywhere. But I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was good, but not great. There wasn't anything terrible about it, but there wasn't anything amazing about it. It's kind of how I can kind of sum up my thoughts on it. This one basically follows our 2 main characters, Rook and Isabel. It takes place in this world where Isabel is like this very crafty painter, and there's like one really good one, and so she's basically gets hired by a bunch of fae to paint their portraits. But there's this thing in like the Fae world where like you are not supposed to paint like emotion because they just don't have emotions. And so this guy named Brooke, who ends up being like the prince or the king, I can't remember which one, he's a nobility of the Autumn Court, comes and asks her to paint his portrait, and she does. And she paints sorrow in his eyes, and so he comes back all angry with her because now his court sees him as weak, and so he grabs her and takes her with him to the Autumn Court for like to be held on trial, basically. And it's the story of that. It's way more than that. The magical system and like the world building is a little complex. I don't fully understand what's going on, and I don't know if that's from lack of clarity in the writing or if it was me and a lack of caring, so I spaced out when I was like listening and I just didn't realize I was doing it. But like the writing wasn't amazing. It was fine. There wasn't anything great about it, but I could not find myself caring about anything that was happening. Especially like once we got to the end, there were some pretty high stakes that were going on, and I was just like, can we be over now? Like I just did not care about what was going on, which is so weird because like everything about this book should have been great. Their chemistry was fun. I really enjoyed, there's like a section of the book where they're traveling to the Autumn Court, and usually those chunks, you guys know, I've said it multiple times, I do not like journeying books because I find the actual journey parts really boring. This worked. I thought that was the best part of it because the banter between them is so funny. And then like once they do have their like, there's no steamy scenes because it's YA. There's like absolutely no smut in this book. But when there are some more romantic scenes between the two of them, those were great, and I believed the chemistry between them. Now, they did fall pretty quickly, but I believed the chemistry. But it was too quick. I believed, like, by the end, you know, we had some stuff that went down between the two of them, and I was like, this is just not believable. It's happening way too fast. And I couldn't find myself caring about what was going on. And I don't know. There wasn't anything amazing about this, but there wasn't anything terrible either. It was a very weird experience. And I don't know if I just, like, mentally gave up on the story so early on that the rest of the book I just like didn't care about. Like I finished the book. It wasn't worth a DNF. It was just like anytime I put it down I didn't want to pick it back up. I couldn't care less about what was going on. The plot was fine. Some stuff happened, especially when we got to like the courts, which was interesting, but I couldn't quite process the world itself because we would get into a situation and then they would throw some stuff at me and I was like, where did this come from? Why is this, you know, fairy lore all of a sudden something that we're talking about and I've never heard of it before? So it was a mix of things, but it still got 3 because like there were some elements to the story that I still really enjoyed. It was fine. It was just fine. But then I had the best book of the month, my favorite book of the month, and my favorite book by this author, which is Happy Place by Emily Henry. I've heard so many good things. I have friends who really enjoyed this and said it was their favorite by her. And so I was like hesitantly optimistic going in. I wasn't quite sure what we were getting into. It got 5 stars, and it's my new favorite. 3 warnings for this book because there are a couple. We have claustrophobia, we have loss of a parent, depression, and anxiety are all kind of mentioned in this book. This follows a group of friends that I think is six friends, and they always go to the same cabin every summer. One of the peak girls in this group is 3 girls and 3 boys. No, it's 4 girls and 3 boys. Yeah, no. That math doesn't add up. Hold on. It's 3 couples is what I'm trying to say. It's like these 3 main girls that have been friends since college. One of them owns this cabin and they go every summer. Well, this summer is apparently going to be the last summer because her father has decided to sell it. And so she's kind of doing this big like powwow with all of them. So she gets all of them together. And Harriet shows up knowing that like it's probably just going to be the girls and maybe one other person because Wynn is not coming. They've talked about this. And then he shows up and everyone thinks that they are still engaged, but they are not. They broke up like 6 months ago and neither of them have told any of their friends. So they end up, for the sake of this friend who's losing this cabin, they pretend to be engaged for a week. They're like, we can do this. We can pretend to be engaged for a week. And of course that works so well. So it's their story. It's the story of friendship. It's the story of this group who is so worried because they're each kind of drifting apart. Some people are starting new jobs. Some people have totally different, live in different states. Some people are thinking about starting families. Some people are married. Some aren't. Like it's one of those, like, it's that time of life where everyone starts to drift apart. And this one thing is what kind of kept them all together. They made sure that every summer they went to this cabin and had a good time. And now that the cabin's going away, one of the girl whose father owns it is very, very worried about what the future holds. So it's a lot of conversation about friendship, but it's also like their relationship is just immaculate. I love them as people. This was just like, their banter was amazing. Of course, they find themselves in all these like ridiculous situations. The chemistry is still there. They clearly broke up, but they're having like, neither of them particularly wanted to break up, and so it's that situation. But also like the ending, because of it's about this group of friends and they're all doing new things, and one of them is thinking about starting a family. And because we are starting a family, I think that part just like hit me so much more. And I think I read this at the perfect time, because like, yes, Emily Henry's really good about like having amazing romances, but there's always something else going on. And so this conversation of friendship was the other thing that was going on. And I'll tell you, it hit me at the right time, or my pregnancy hormones were all over the place. I don't know what was happening, but like this hit, and I sobbed at the end of this book, like a good sob, like it was like a happy sob, just because like it felt very relevant to me. So I think that might be why I enjoyed it so much. But still, like within 20 pages, I was hooked and knew this was going to be my new favorite by this author. And like all of her other books, I've given 4 or 5 stars. Like I don't think I've given anything less than like a 4 or 4.5. And all of them I have loved, but there's just something that she did. I don't know what she did with her like little magic writing stuff with this one, but like something about this book just like worked, and it's my new favorite. The next one I think is also one that I just picked up at the right time, and that is 7 Faceless Saints, and this is by N.K. Lobb. It's the first in a duology. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I absolutely adored this book. Trigger warnings for this one: we have PTSD from, more specifically, obviously there's murder, and there's a few things with eyes. So like if you are squeamish and like stuff with eyes, especially in like torture situations and murder situations, is not your thing, you have been warned. This book is a fun, fantastical story. It's also got a second chance romance in it, and I loved it. So this takes place in a world where there are 7 Faceless Saints. They're kind of like the gods running the world. I'm gonna butcher the explanation probably, so I would check out what this is about online. But basically, if I can process what I'm trying to tell you, is that this world, there are basically like, each Faceless Saint has a specific power attached to them, and if you have that power, then you are kind of like in their school, their cluster. And this follows Roz and Damien, who were really close when they were younger, and he ended up going off to war, and stuff went down, and so they no longer talk. And she showed this ability super late in life. So she is now one of these disciples, I guess. It's not right the right word, but it's like one of these people who fall under one of the saints. Damien does not have any powers, but because of who his dad is, he was given this ability to be the head of the guard, who protects like the high and mighty. And there are people who don't have magical powers, and they're kind of thought of as like second-class citizens. Some people start dying, and there's a connection between the two of them, and so Roz is basically like trying to figure out what's going on, because the first few people that have died are all the non-magic people, and then all of a sudden one of the super high-ups dies, and so Damien is tasked with trying to figure out what's going on, and they end up crossing paths and agree to work together to solve these murders. So it's fantastical. It has this murder mystery element to it. The world building is not complicated. Like when you sit down and you think about the actual world once you've read it, it is incredibly complex, but the author does such a good job of explaining it to you in chunks, and also like in a way that is easy to digest, so you are not really confused. Like the world totally makes sense to you, and then you think back and you go, that is a very complex world and magic system that this person has created, but I understand it completely. So I don't know why all of a sudden this book is what, like, I just needed to read it, but it was really, really good. I'm interested to see where we're going to go in the second one. I love these characters. We had some stuff go down in the first one, and it's not super long, but it's a fun, fantastical story. If you like the vibe, plot-wise, of the first Crescent City book, there's a lot of similarities in my mind to this one, because it's got 2 people who are teaming up together to solve a bunch of murders, and that's what happens in the first Crescent City book as well. It focuses more on the solving stuff at the beginning, So you definitely have that like detective style vibe with them while they're trying to figure out what's going on. I don't know, there's just so many good things about this, and there were so many twists in this that I literally gasped out loud. I think I finished this in like a day because I just loved it so much. So I really hope the second one comes in soon because I don't want to forget anything from this one. And I had not thought about this book once. This is a Fairy Loot edition. I didn't think twice about it. I honestly thought about unhauling it a couple of times just because I was like, nothing about this sounds interesting to me. The cover kind of freaks me out with like the eyes and stuff, but then I picked it up and it was great. There's a lot of stuff in here that's very reminiscent of other fantasy stories. So there's a lot of like pieces from other stories that like kind of I feel like are hodgepodge to do this, yet it also is like a super unique story in my opinion to anything I've read. So, and it's also only a duology and they're both out. So if you don't want to like dedicate your time to a very long series, this one might be the one for you. I loved it. I'm gonna hold on to it. It was fantastic. The next one is another one that I kind of had a very interesting / bizarre reading experience with, and that is Blazewrath Games by Amparo Ortiz. This is the first book in this duology, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And it's basically a Olympic style game where there's just like one game. It's not like you go to the Olympics and there's a lot of different options. It's just one game, a bunch of different countries competing against each other, and it's kind of like I think I explained it in my vlog of, this is the best way I can describe it, is it reminds me of Quidditch from Harry Potter in the way of like everyone plays this game. There's all these different countries, but like there's about 5 or 6 different players on this team and they all do something very specific. Everyone rides a dragon, and they basically are like competing to get to this end goal. And so our main character is a runner and she's like the last thing. So you have to do like this thing and then this thing and then this thing, and then she can do like her little like run up the mountain. And she has to like fight people up the mountain. It's like kind of complex, but she lives in America, but her father is Puerto Rican, and so she gets chosen because of that for the Puerto Rican team. But of course it's way more than that. Lots of stuff goes down. This I think is a really good book if you are a contemporary fan that wants to get into fantasy, because it's written like a contemporary. It's written specifically like a YA contemporary, and at times it's even written similarly to like a middle grade. Like it's just like the way it's written is very young, and I think that's what was the biggest thing for me as to why I didn't get invested in what was going on. I don't know, it just like, there was just some disconnect for me. And I think it's because it's this fantastical world set in a very contemporary setting. You've got people who are like witches in this world as well. You've got this big like federation that like is running everything. And then you've got like a couple of people who are going against the government and talking about dragons and how we should free them and all this kind of stuff. And so that's all of that is going on, but then there's also like pop culture references. Like within this book, I can't remember when this book was written. It's been a few years, but the Obamas were mentioned at one point, and Skype was mentioned at one point, and a couple other things that are like very telling of our time. And so it really threw me off because it felt like a contemporary, but then all of a sudden these dragons showed up, and I was just like very confused. It felt Hunger Games, but with less killing. I think it's very fascinating because there are some really interesting conversations with her and identity, because she technically hasn't lived in Puerto Rico for years. So like a lot of people are like, is she actually Puerto Rican? Like, is she Puerto Rican enough to play? And so there's a lot of conversation of identity when it comes to that. There's a lot of queer representation in this story, which I loved. So yeah, there's just a lot of good conversation about like identity and connection to your home country and stuff like that, that I enjoyed reading. But like overall, I think it was the writing. That was the biggest thing that just really took me out of the story, because it was so contemporary. And I was like, if I had known that going in, then maybe it would have been okay. But like there was just some stuff that I was like, this feels really bizarre. The next one I picked up was Misrule by Heather Walter, which is the sequel to Malice in this duology. I gave this one 4 stars. I found this really interesting because the first book in the series basically is kind of a sapphic Sleeping Beauty retelling. We follow our main 2 characters, Briar and Alice. And Alice is a dark grace, and she's the only dark grace. She's got Vela blood. And so basically, people come to her if they need curses and stuff. She lives in this house with all the other graces, but all the other graces are like the good graces, and so they come to those graces for like beauty and like all those types of things. She ends up meeting Aurora. Briar is the name of the town, village, they live in, and I really want it to be her name, Aurora. And she is a lot like the last in this long line of like the nobility, and she needs to find her true love by the age of 21, I believe it is, 20 or 21, and kiss them, and then she can live, otherwise she's gonna die. And so she basically like meets up with Alice at some ball at some point, and Alice agrees to help her out, and it's like a story between the two of them. It's a little bit of a romance between the two of them, and then shit quite literally hits the fan at the end of the first book, and this is where we have in this one. Because of the events of the first book, it's going to be really hard to talk about this one at all, but because of what happened, this feels like a completely different story in a completely different world. I did kind of try to find something, I tried to look up things from the first book just to remind myself, and there's not a lot that I needed to know going into this. Obviously, you needed to know and remember like the big thing that happened at the end of the first book, but a lot of the details, if you need to know, they remind you. So this is good for people like if you like a Fae court vibe, especially in the second book. You need the first book to make the second book make sense, but if you like that Fae court grotesque kind of vibe, that's definitely what happens in this one. I'm gonna tell you, this felt like a totally different world. It felt like a totally different world. It felt like I was starting a new series, honestly, at one point, but like not in a bad way. Like this isn't a negative. It's just like the world is totally different than what it was in the first book. So like I really enjoyed it, and there's a lot of twists and turns in this one that I didn't expect. It did wrap up really, really quickly, but it wrapped up in a way that I didn't expect, which I liked. And I don't know, like it was good. It was really good. I liked seeing our characters again. I liked seeing our main character and how she is struggling with the person she wants to be versus the person that like the people she has in this book, how they want her to be or how she has been with them. She feels very two-faced at times, like to herself, because she's putting on a persona for one person and that's not really who she is. And so it's really interesting to see that dynamic. And then there's just some good stuff happens in this book. There's a lot of twists in here I didn't quite expect. Like specifically there's one twist that like sets off the entirety of this book, and I didn't expect that until the end of the book, to be honest. So I didn't really know what I was getting into when I came to this one, but the plot was totally different than what I expected. I am going to unhaul this series though, because it does take up a lot of space on my shelves. Like these are pretty thick books, and I think someone else is going to enjoy them more. I'm not going to reread them, but they were a good time. I'm so glad I did read them, especially the second one, because I almost didn't, and I'm glad I did because it was still really, really good, but I think somebody else can probably enjoy these stories just a little bit more. The next book that I ended up picking up was one that my lovely friend Lauren picked out for me, and that is Wishtree by Catherine Applegate. This is a middle grade slash, I think it's middle grade, slash children's book about trees, specifically one tree, and it takes place in this town where this tree lives in front of two houses that have kids, and one family has recently moved in and they are Muslim American. Because of that, they are looked at not the best. And so this tree has been there for thousands, hundreds, probably not thousands, but hundreds of years, and has seen a lot of stuff with humanity. And so the story really is this tree, which once a year, that's why it's called Wishtree, is once a year people will write their wishes on whatever they can find, pieces of paper, string, whatever, and like tie it to the tree. And so this girl ties a note to the tree in the middle of the night and asks for a friend. And so the tree decides that even though it's not a good decision, it's going to get involved, and it tries to like help this little girl and the boy next door become friends. And it's way more than that. Like there's some pretty deep conversations in this book, but it's written in such a really beautiful way that like is super whimsical. Like the tree is, like I said, hundreds of years old, but it also still has this very childlike wonder about it. And so it's very interesting because it's all from the tree's perspective. So it's really interesting to see that. It's also really interesting because there is some science thrown in as well, like biology about trees in general and different animals that live within the tree. And so not only are you like learning about this story, you also have this element of education thrown in as well, but not in a like, it's not done like overhandedly. It's very like subtle. It was just a really beautiful story. I gave this one 4 stars. I highly recommend reading it physically, or if you can get the ebook. I'm assuming the ebook also has this, but like the book itself has these beautiful illustrations, and there's definitely a couple of illustrations that are mentioned in the story, like something is like written on the tree, but then like it's never said what those words are, and the next page is a picture of the tree. So you know what, if you have like the book physically, you know what's on the tree, but if you're reading audibly, you might not. So it's just, I would recommend doing it that way, but also the illustrations are just genuinely beautiful. And it's just this fun, beautiful story about friendship and overcoming adversity and what this tree means to the community. And this tree is also like dealing with the fact that it's really old, and so it's starting to think about like a tree version of death. And so there's just a few things like that that are really important conversations, and I loved it. I just genuinely loved it. It was so cute. I definitely want to read other things by this author. I think it's she has a very beautiful writing style, and I'm curious what other things are out there. I know she's got a book about an otter, so might be picking that one up. But yeah, I think it's just a beautiful story, and everyone should read it. The next book I picked up was a Christina Lauren book. That was Twice in a Blue Moon. This book got 4 stars. I genuinely loved it way more than I thought I was going to. It follows our 2 main characters, Sam and Tate, and they meet when they both happen to be Americans in London. And so they meet when they were young, and they like fall in love, and Tate is actually the daughter of a pretty famous movie star. And so because of that, she keeps her identity pretty secret. She goes by her mother's maiden name. Stuff happened between her parents, so like they've kind of stepped out of the limelight. Her parents are no longer together, and she lives with her mom on a farm. And so everyone wants to know what happened to this daughter and the wife. And so she never reveals this, but she feels very, very close to Sam, and she does finally reveal to him who she is, and he's like, that's great. And they just kind of like continue their friendship, and then something happens and her identity is revealed to the press. Jumps in the future, and she's now a movie star, or trying to become a movie star, and she is starring in this film, and her father is in it, and he's the father, and she's one of the main characters. And she gets to the set, and she and her father have a lot of issues because he is a movie star who's been around for a long time, and he likes it to be about him, and he wants to put on a perfect facade for everybody. And she's like, I just want you to be a real dad. Like, they have a lot of like interesting conversations. But she gets to this film and then realizes that Sam's the writer who wrote the entire film, and they end up having to be forced to work together. What I found interesting about this book is usually when you have stories like this where something happened in the past, it'll swap back and forth between present and past, and then as you continue, you don't know as the reader what actually happened between them, and then it's like revealed. You know exactly what happened between them. They do all of the past right up front. Like the first fourth of this book is what happens in the past, and then it jumps to the present day. And so you have no mystery about what went down. I did think I knew where this book was going to go. Like, I thought based on just the synopsis and kind of what I expected, I was like, I know exactly how this is going to end. I know exactly what the twist, if you will, is going to be near the end. And I was so wrong. I did not expect the way that they did this, and I loved it. I thought it was really good. I thought it was genius. I thought they took what I thought was going to happen and completely twisted it on its head. And then it was just really good. Like, I don't know if I just went in with like lower expectations. Out of all of their books, it wasn't top of my TBR, but of course I love them and I wanted to read everything by them, so I definitely wanted to read it. I thought I would enjoy it because I do like them as writers, and it was great. It was way better than I ever expected. And what I found also very interesting about this story is that the story that's being told in the movie is about a mixed couple in, like, I can't remember exactly the time period wise, but it was set like way back when it was not acceptable for a white woman to be with a black man. And so she and her co-star have a lot of conversations about, or not a lot, but it is a conversation between the two of them of like why, specifically for him, why the story is important, why he wanted to do it, because he's only ever done like a specific type of movie before, and this is the first one that's going to be like a different role for him. And so that's a conversation as well, which I thought was really interesting. It's not like a huge part of the story, but it is mentioned, and I didn't process that until way later in the book. But I really liked the romance. I thought it was great, and they're great, and I liked it a lot. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong, that's why I got 4 stars, But it's a pretty good one. The next one I ended up picking up was the final book in the Regency Vows series by Martha Waters, which is To Woo and To Wed. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was a good book to end on. It's about Sophie and West. They were planning to get married when they were much younger, and stuff happened, and he ended up getting in an accident, and then when he woke up, she had married somebody else. And so now she's been widowed for quite a while. She is the oldest of 5 sisters, and she and one of her other sisters have been widowed, but all the other ones are still married happily and living their life. And the other sister has an interest in getting married again, but is afraid to, because she's afraid to leave Sophie alone, because she and Sophie spend a lot of time together because they are the 2 widowed sisters. And Sophie's like, no, you clearly love him. What are you doing? So she reaches out to West and basically says, can we pretend to be engaged so I can help my sister out? And West is like, yes, I have my own reasons, because my father's a jerk, for why I would like this to be a thing. So sure. And so they pretend to be engaged. And it's a lot of shenanigans, as you would expect from this book. I mean, that's just kind of what this author does, is she throws shenanigans out the wazoo. The banter was great. I love the 2 of them. The chemistry between them is like immaculate. I just really liked their story. I thought it was good, but I also am really glad that this is the end of this series. This is the 5th book, and the author is done with this series now. It's starting to get very repetitive for me. The first book was still my favorite by a long shot, but I really enjoyed the others, and I like all of our characters. This one was funny because you got to see all of them again, and they all played a pretty big-ish role in the story. So it was very much a kind of like farewell to this entire series while also creating a story for these 2 characters. So it felt like these were the perfect ones to end on. It felt like the perfect ending. I got exactly what I wanted from it. They wrapped it up very, very well. It's not the most unique thing in the world. I've read other historical romances that are probably better than this, but I still really enjoyed the series. I still really enjoy her writing. I'm excited to see what other things she has in store, because this is, I believe, her debut series. So like, now that she's done, what's next? I don't know, but I'm definitely excited to see what that's going to be. Okay, the next one I picked up was Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I have a lot of thoughts about this one. So, trigger warnings for this one. Weight loss / and sort of eating disorder, if you will, and a toxic / controlling friendship. Those are the 2 biggest parts of this book. I gave 4 stars because I still enjoyed the story, but like, this has been marketed a lot, I think, online. Hockey romances were really popular last year, and because of that, I think this got a lot of love, especially on TikTok. It was marketed as, yes, look at this cute, adorable cover, don't let it fool you, it's a steamy romance. And yeah, that's not a joke. There were so many scenes, and it honestly got really repetitive to the point of I just spaced out when there was a smutty scene, because like, I was more interested in the plot than I was in the smut, and I think the smut took away from my enjoyment of the story. I knew going in this was going to be a lot of smut. It was a lot of smut. If you don't know what the story is about, it follows our 2 main characters, Anastasia and Nate, and they go to this school called the University of California, Maple Hills. She is on the competitive figure skating team. He is the captain of the hockey team. There's 2 ice rinks, one for the figure skating, one for the hockey team, and the hockey team's rink basically gets destroyed, and so they end up having to share the same ice as the figure skaters, and they get off on the wrong foot. He's trying to make this better because the hockey team is known for pulling pranks, so everyone assumes this is a prank that went very, very wrong, and it's not. The hockey team didn't do it, but that's what everyone assumes. So he, as the captain, is trying to mend fences between teams, and he chooses her. I don't know why she's the one from the figure skating team, but he chooses her to basically be the one that he's trying to make amends with, and so they get off on the wrong foot. And it just kind of spirals from there, and then it turns into a relationship between the 2 of them. Her figure skating partner is an asshole, and we hate him. That's all I'm saying. If you know, you know. It was good. I'm glad I read it. I liked their relationship. I liked seeing this hockey team actually become really good friends with her and her best friend. I thought I was going to hate the hockey elements of it. I was very worried. I'm not a hockey person. I'm not a sports person. So any sort of sports romance I usually steer clear from, but there was something about this one that just really called my name. So I gave it a shot. And it was good, and I'm glad I read it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. There's a lot of plot things in here that I found really interesting. There's a lot about therapy in this book, especially with her, and she suffers a lot of, from a lot of anxiety, specifically performance anxiety and being perfect. And so there's a lot with that, and then it continues, like I said, with that toxic relationship that becomes a huge part. So there's some very important and interesting conversations that are had in this book, but there is so much smut, like to the point of it is excessively, like it's excessive. It does not need to have that many scenes. This book would probably be half the size if all of the smutty scenes were out. Now, I'm not saying take all of them out, because yes, there are some that you need for the plot, and also some of them were good. But like after a while, I was like, and here we are again, the same scene over and over again. Can we move on? So I found myself spacing out. I did listen to this on audio, but I found myself spacing out when I got to those scenes. This was good, but not great, and so therefore I don't need to continue, I guess. I don't know. I'm glad I read it, because it's been on my list for quite a while, and now I know that sometimes sports romances do work if you can get the right one. The next book that I picked up was The Dreamers, and this is by Karen Thompson Walker. This is another sci-fi mystery, contemporary sci-fi mystery kind of story. I kept comparing it to The Measure by Nikki Reed, which I read, and then The One by John Mars, which I read pretty back to back. There's a lot of similarities between those books and this one, but this one was not my favorite. I did give it 4 stars, but I'm like, now that I've separated myself from it, I'm thinking it might be more of a 3. But trigger warnings obviously for quarantine with this book. I say obviously, you might not know what I'm talking about. This book follows a college campus where people just start falling asleep and they cannot be woken up. And so they get put in quarantine at the hospital, and it's, at first it's just like 1 or 2 people, but then it's an entire college floor, and then it spreads from there. It's all over California. It's Southern California. I don't think it stretches to any other states, but it's Southern California, to the point of like everybody falls asleep. And they're all alive, but they're having to be kept alive by like feeding tubes and stuff, because they are asleep and they can't nourish themselves. So it's the story of like this weird situation and where it goes and like what it means. And so I liked the writing, which I found really interesting because it is third person. So it's told very similarly to how The Measure is told, where it's third person. It's very scientific. It's very like matter of fact, this is what's happening. Very almost biographical, but then at the same time it's multiple points of view. You follow a bunch of different people. You follow a girl who lived on the hall who was the roommate of the girl who started this whole thing, and a guy that she ends up like just kind of teaming up with. You've got the doctor who is working really, really hard to figure out what's going on. You've got these 2 young girls whose father falls asleep. He's a doomsday prepper, and their father falls asleep. You've got some parents here and there. You've got some random people. And the one that like really connected with me, this was probably not the right book to read at the right time, is that there's a next door neighbor to the girls whose father's a doomsday prepper, who are newly parents. So it's this couple, and they're like a newborn who is like quite literally weeks old. And a lot of stuff that happens with them, like their specific storyline, stressed me out so much. And I'm sure it's because of when I read it. I'm sure it's because we're expecting our own in a few months. But like their story specifically, anytime that like they would come up, I was like, oh God, make it stop. Like it really stressed me out. And just, I don't know, like I can't really explain it. I enjoyed the story for what it was, because it really did showcase like this world and how the government and people reacted, and how they basically got quarantined, like the entire state basically got quarantined and you weren't allowed to leave. And I found that really interesting, especially because this was written in 2019. So this was way before, not way before, but it was before COVID and the pandemic happened. So like this was not influenced by what was happening. This like came out before, which I found interesting, because there's definitely some similarities between how people react. You also got the government's reaction, which is, I would say, different than how our government reacted, but there are some similarities in this. I don't know, it was really interesting. But what drove me nuts was the ending, because I feel like we didn't get an end. I feel like we didn't get an answer to the questions that I wanted answers to. It just kind of like magically figured itself out, and I did not like that. I needed more explanation. So it's fine, but I'm definitely gonna unhaul this one as well. I've been unhauling a bunch this month. I don't know what happened this month, but there's a lot of iffy books, because like it was good and I liked the way it was written, and I think that nostalgia to the other books that I loved so much is probably what kept me through. It's also really short. Like, it was not a tough book to get through. The writing was really simple. It was interesting to see all these different characters in this world and how they reacted to what was going on. But as a whole, I really didn't like the way it ended. So, yeah, that one, I'm glad I read it, but it can go. The next one is a graphic novel, a middle grade graphic novel that I picked up, which is Wings of Fire, the first volume of this series. It is a middle grade novel that has been turned into a graphic novel, so I did read the graphic novel version. I gave this 3 stars because I still, even though it's been a few weeks, I'm still not entirely sure what to think about this. It's about these 5 dragons who have basically been collected by a few other dragons and been raised in this cave away from other people because they are supposed to be part of this prophecy. There's like a war going on and they're going to stop the war. And so each of them have like a different species of dragon, and they have a different ability, and it's all that kind of stuff. And they are treated terribly by the people who are raising them, or the dragons who are raising them. And so they basically say, screw this, we're going to run away. And they just want to see the world again. And so this book is their first step into that world. The art was stunning. It was about these dragons and had all these beautiful illustrations. I will say this, sometimes I couldn't tell some of the dragons apart if they were the same species. So the main 5 were all different colors because they were all different species, and that was fine. But then like you would meet some of dragons who were the same species as one of them, and it was hard for me to tell some of them apart. But it was super colorful. I really enjoyed it. And it was fun to have this world about dragons and like see the fantastical elements of these dragons. But the world is a very harsh world. There's so much death in this book. And like I said, the people who are the dragons who raised these were genuinely the worst people. Because like there's 5 of them, and 4 of them are the correct species for the prophecy, but then one of them they couldn't get, so they just picked up another one. And so she has been like basically told she's worthless her entire life. Like no one thinks anything. I mean, the other 4, these 5 dragons are really close. They're like siblings, so like they care for each other. But like she has been told by the people who are raising them that she's worthless and is the wrong this and that and all this stuff. And I was like, that is awful. And so there's just a lot of themes in this book and a lot of things that happen that I felt like was not, it felt weird for a middle grade. Like it felt like the story was an adult story and the way it was told was for middle grade. I didn't hate it. It sounds like I hated it. I didn't. But like it was just a weird reading experience, and I didn't love the way that it went about stuff. The next one I read was The Rumor Game by Danielle Clayton and Sonia Charaportra. This one I gave 3.5 stars to. There's so many trigger warnings, so just, here we go. Bullying or cyberbullying, sexual abuse, assault, weight loss, self-harm, fat phobia, and racism are all mentioned in this book. It follows 3 girls in this private high school, where all of the people who go there, their parents are like rich and wealthy and really involved in a bunch of stuff. I believe it's close to DC, so it's a lot of political families, but if you go to this school, your parents have money. It follows, like I said, 3 girls who get really involved in this rumor mill. One girl had an issue or an accident the previous year, and she is trying to get her life back and her best friend back, which is one of the other perspectives we have, but she also has become really close with her next door neighbor. And so that's Bren, and then you have Georgie, who is the next door neighbor, and she went to a camp over the summer and she has lost a bunch of weight. And so there's a lot of conversation specifically because she didn't want to go to this. She didn't care. She liked how she looked, but her mother didn't. And she comes from a very stereotypical Indian family. And so there's a lot of conversations with that. And she, because of the way she looks, she is kind of this new thing for their school, and so a lot of the people who didn't give her any time, especially boys, are now giving her time. And then Cora is the third perspective, and she and Bren were best friends, and they're not really friends anymore. And this book really starts with a party, and they all go to it, and there are rumors that Georgie slept with Cora's boyfriend. It starts a whole chain of events. And so this book tackles, like I said, all those trigger warnings, but specifically cyberbullying, because you have the chapters in these girls' perspectives, and then in between the chapters you have text messages between them, and then you also have like social media, like Instagram style posts, all you see are the responses and the comments on them, and they're genuinely like horrifying things that people are saying. Later on, we have a lot of conversation about sexual abuse. So this book I gave 3.5 stars because it's written for a YA audience. So start off, I am not the target audience of this book, and I knew that going in. So I didn't enjoy the way it was written because I couldn't get past just some of the things that was happening. Some of the like the rumor mill, because it started with this very like teenage girl on girl like liking my boyfriend and that kind of stuff. It was just very like, I rolled my eyes so many times at the beginning of this book. And also I felt like I didn't really care about what was going on. I was intrigued pretty early because we don't really know what happened with Bran right away. We find that out pretty quickly, but like as far as when the book starts, you kind of have hints to what happened with her and why no one likes her right now. So you have that conversation. And that's really why I didn't love the way it was written. I couldn't find myself caring a lot of the time. But the conversations in this book are incredibly important, especially for younger readers. So I'm glad that I read this so that I could tell people to read this, because it is a good book, and I think all YA readers, especially kids in high school age, because yes, you get bullied your whole life, but you can get bullied your whole life, but I feel like it really kind of is amplified when you're in high school. And so that's why I think this is important. And there's a lot of resources in this book, and there's a lot of really deep conversations, because like it starts very offhandedly, something really, really innocent that people are thinking, and it spirals into this terrible situation. It's a tough book to get through, don't get me wrong. And while I may not have loved it, I think it's super important and everyone should read it. Also, something about, they talk about race in this book a little bit, because our 3 main characters are 3 different races. We have someone who's white, someone who's black, and someone who's Indian. And so while I obviously can't comment on like representation and how that works, it is interesting to see the dynamic of these 3 people and how their race sometimes plays into some of the bullying and some of the stuff that people are saying online about them. And so like, even though like you do have people who say these terrible things, and then you do have people who are calling them out on it, it's never enough. And so that's why racism is a pretty big trigger, because there's a lot of terrible things that people like, especially the online, like the sections where it shows the social media posts, it's just genuinely terrible. So I'm not probably talking about this book the best way, but I may not have loved it. I think it's important and everyone should read it, is the moral of what I'm trying to say. Alright, and then the last book, finally, we're here. The last book I read in the month was Lore Olympus Volume 5, which I gave 5 stars to. As with all of the books in this series, trigger warnings for themes of abuse, sexual trauma, and toxic relationships. This is the 4th volume in this series that I just love. It's a modernized retelling-ish of Hades and Persephone, and I just will never stop showing off how beautiful I find the art style in here. And I just love how like colorful it is, because it's very different than what you would expect. But I noticed this time around, the reason that it's so colorful and the reason it works is because it like shows that these people are still gods. Like, they are people. There's some sections in here specifically I'm thinking about when they go to the mortal world and they like are no longer these colorful things. So I think having these very colorful moments, or these very colorful characters, is a really cool way of showcasing that these people are not mortal and they are these otherworldly beings. And this one specifically, obviously it's 4th one, so I can't talk a lot about plot-wise, but I do think there was more plot in this one than we got in the last couple. It's been like over a year, I think, since I read the 3rd one, so I may be remembering wrong, but I feel like there's more plot in this one. I really enjoyed that part of it, because there's this confrontation that happens in this book that I have been waiting for since the 1st volume, and we finally get it, and it's beautiful, and I love every second of it. It's not perfect, and of course it's not going to solve all of the problems, but I just loved it, and I love diving back in this world. I love these characters. I love the art style. I think it's stunning, and I will still and forever and always be obsessed with the series. And the chemistry between Persephone and Hades is fantastic. And of course, there's 1,000 reasons they shouldn't be together. I just loved them. And any scene with them just makes me happy. And there's just so much pining between them, and it's great. So I honestly probably can't say too much about this because it is, like I said, the 4th in a series. It's a graphic novel. There's not a lot to say, but I feel like the plot really got amped up in this one, and I loved this one. I think the last 2 volumes got 4 stars. The fact that this one got 5 stars, I think, is very telling, and I can't wait for more. And that's it. Oh my lord, we've been here forever. But I hope you enjoyed this ridiculously long wrap-up. As always, I would love to know your thoughts if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, or if there's something that you read in April, if you participated in the readathon or not. Let me know if there's something fun that you really enjoyed. But if you liked this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!